Religion, as old as man's first primal thoughts, was born of superstition and a quest to seek out order and meaning of the world they found themselves within. The Celts were polytheists, and prior to Roman influences, believed everything first existed in the spirit world before it was able to come into existence in the material world. So for the Celts, everything had a spirit. Lakes, rivers, the forest, the mountains, the moon, everything had a spirit. There was, however, above all these spiritual beings, the Earth Mother. Mother of nature, the goddess of life, and her consort, the spirit of the heavens and the skies. And he was manifest as the sun god, one who was the god of darkness and light and of death, life and rebirth. And these two deities were the parents from which all things began. The Celts saw the cosmos as consisting of earth, sky and sea, with the earth, sea and the waters resting over the underworld. They chose their sacred sites to venerate their gods, and these sites they believed to be portals between the three worlds, that of the earth, the heavens and the underworld. And those sites were typically the forest groves, the caves, the rivers and the lakes that lay on the earth and were open to the heavens and rested upon the underworld. And so they worshipped their gods in the open air, believing that to confine them within walls was an insult to the gods, as these were the Celtic gods representative of nature, and an appropriate natural environment fit for the deity in question was a necessary requirement. Now, the Celts were an honourable people, and they believed in the concept of a debt of gratitude. And so, if a host was to give you shelter, then you must repay them in kind. To the Celts, logic would dictate that the same concept applied to the gods. So if you would give the gods something, then they would be indebted to you. After all, it was only good manners and the right thing to do to repay a debt, and therefore the gods would be obligated to you. This, then, is where the idea of sacrifice comes from. You give the gods something, and good manners would dictate that they would pay you back in kind. Lakes and rivers were especially used for votive offerings, and we know this from the many archaeological finds. They were seen as an entry point to the underworld, and the votive offerings were made to the gods by casting their precious objects, such as jewelry, armor, highly decorated and prized weapons, into the murky depths as offerings to appease the gods and to ask for their favors. Another often used portal between the earth and the other worlds were the bogs. They were part earth, part water, and open to the heavens, and they were seen as borderlands between the material, earthly world, the heavens, and the underworld. And it wasn't just votive offerings that were sacrificed within these peat bogs. There is the case of Lindoman, who it is thought died around the time of 60 AD. And he was discovered by workers digging for peat in the Lindo moss bogs. He was in his mid-20s, stood about 5'7" tall, and had a neatly trimmed beard, a moustache, brown hair, and except for an armband made out of fox fur, he was entirely naked. Now, there have been hundreds of bodies like this that have been pulled out of the marshes of northern Europe. So this is not an isolated case, and there's more to this story. By the nature of the death, we can see that this was a ritual killing. Some of these sacrifices may have been criminals or enemies caught in combat, but some, it seems, were chosen. Due to the condition of the hands and well-manicured nails, it is thought that at least some of these sacrifices, including that of Lindoman, may have been people of a high standing within the Celtic community, and perhaps it is believed that some were tribal kings. Many archaeologists and historians now believe that when a king was deemed no longer fit to rule, he would be sacrificed to make way for a younger and fitter successor. And so then, as in the death of Lindoman, we see a ritual killing. First, he was clubbed over the head, a mercy blow. Then he was strangled and his throat cut, and then he was cast into the bog and left to drown. This type of ritual sacrificial killing is known as the threefold death. So we all know that the number 3 was sacred to the Celts. And this then is the way that a sacrificial victim, sacrificed to the gods, should die. Sacrificial offerings were also made at the great fire festivals, and these fire festivals were held 4 times a year, and they celebrated the changes within the agricultural cycle. Beltane was such a festival, and it was held on the May Eve, halfway between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, when the cattle were herded out to their summer pastures. It was a time when rituals were performed to protect the cattle. But Beltane was also a time of human sacrifice in ancient times, and human sacrifice and offerings were made to the sun god. The rituals would then be followed by rejoicing and festivities. Beltane was the sacred celebration of the sun god Belinus. James Fraser tells us in his book The Golden Bough how during the Beltane festivals a cake of oatmeal was baked, and then it was cut into pieces and placed into a hat. One piece, however, was marked with charcoal. A piece of cake was then offered to each person that was contributing to the festivities, and whoever drew the blackened bit was the chosen person who was to be sacrificed to Belinus. Leading these Celtic rituals were the Celtic priesthood, otherwise known as the Druids. And according to Roman sources, the Druids engaged extensively in human sacrifice. Now, Julius Caesar tells us that criminals were considered preferable for use in sacrificial rituals, but when criminals were in short supply, then innocents would have to do. One form of sacrifice recorded by Caesar was the burning alive of victims in a large wooden effigy in the shape of a giant man, which today we refer to as a wicker man. This was a sacrifice to the sun god, and it was meant to ensure the fertility of the cattle and the crops. Another classical writer Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian writing between 60 and 30 BC, also attests that a sacrifice acceptable to the Celtic gods had to be attended by a Druid, for they were the intermediaries between the people and the divine. These men, he tells us, predict the future by observing the flight and calls of birds and by the sacrifice of holy animals. All orders of the society are in their power, and in very important matters they prepare a human victim, plunging a dagger into his chest, and then, by observing the way his limbs convulse as he falls, and the gushing of his blood, they are able to read the future. And as further evidence of the Druidic practice of sacrifice, Tacitus tells us, whilst commentating on the aftermath of the Roman attack on Annis Morn, the next step was to install a garrison among the conquered population and to demolish the groves consecrated to their savage cults, for they considered it a pious duty to slate the altars with captive blood and to consult the deities by means of human entrails. So, if you've enjoyed today's video, then please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing. And if you have any questions, then drop them down below. And with that, I'll see you again on the next one.